Hi there folks, back for another video over here on Because of Dragons. The title's probably given this one away. We're going to be talking about D&D, but also diving into some other role-playing games as well, and you might have also noticed that I've done a slightly different setup for this one as well, just to see whether or not folks like it. Added some background images and all that kind of thing. But yeah, we're going to be starting off talking about D&D and some alternative role-playing games that you can dive into if you want to try something a little bit different. Now, I'm going to preface everything by saying that there is nothing wrong with D&D. D&D is great, and there is a reason why it is the world's biggest role-playing game, not just because of Critical Role. I have played a lot of 5th edition. I've really enjoyed it. I think they've done a really nice job with it and expanded it very nicely. There's some really good stuff in there, looking at different start sets and all that kind of thing, which have sort of developed over time. I think they did a really good job with sort of tweaking 5th edition from what we had in 4th. Again, there was nothing really wrong with 4th either, really, but I really liked what they did with 5th, where they kind of amalgamated a lot of decisions from existing editions of D&D and then brought that together into something that everybody now generally quite enjoys. But one of the things about D&D is that it doesn't necessarily do everything, and one of the nice things about other systems is that they provide bespoke and interesting mechanical systems that you can use in order to go on different adventures with different feels and different sort of aesthetics, really. So that's what I want to try to sort of go through today. So there's going to be 5 role-playing games here that sort of span beyond what we've got with Dungeons and Dragons. The first of these that we're going to go through, and I'm going to be showing off a little bit on camera as well, is Warhammer Age of Sigmar Soulbound. So, for those of you who are not aware of Age of Sigmar Soulbound, which I have here, looking all wonderful, with a Stormcast Eternal on the front, kicking ass and taking names. Warhammer Age of Sigmar Soulbound is a role-playing game set within the mortal realms of Warhammer Age of Sigmar. As you might have imagined. The game has you playing as larger-than-life heroes fighting for the forces of order under the god King Sigmar, or taking on the role of other heroes from destruction, so that's sort of like orcs and ogres and trolls and goblins, or even the champions of death, so that's vampires and ghosts and all kind of things like that in some of their expanded material. The thing that I think really makes Soulbound an awesome game to try out beyond Dungeons and Dragons is the dice pool mechanic. So everything uses d6s, so it's been designed so that you could move away from playing the war game to diving into this and have just as fun an experience. Basically, you know how D&D, you know how d6 work. Move on and dive in. There's like a dice pool mechanic that you use to get started with the game and doing all of your actions. That's tied to specific kind of stats and that kind of thing. Nice and easy, simple to understand. You roll the pool of dice. You're trying to hit a number within that pool, and then a number of successes based on that. So say, for example, you had 6 dice and you're trying to do something. You might be looking for a 5 within that dice pool because it was really hard to do, and then you maybe need to get 2 successes within that. So you need to have 2 of those dice be 5s. Nice and simple, very easy to do. Everything in the game is then sort of taken to the next level by the fact that it is... look at my computer going very slowly. Everything is then sort of ramped up by the idea that in Age of Sigmar Soulbound, you are better than the best humans within this world in many respects. There's a big focus in the game on feeling a little bit like superheroes in some regards. The way that I've kind of likened Age of Sigmar Soulbound to other games is that, like, in Age of Sigmar Soulbound, you're playing the characters from a Marvel movie. You're playing the Captain Americas, the Thors, the Black Widows, the Hawkeyes, because you have the ability, like there's even Black Widow and Hawkeye are more amazing at what they do than a normal human being. And even in within the world of the Mortal Realms and Age of Sigmar, that's kind of where you're coming in at that kind of level. Like a normal battle mage can incinerate entire battlefields of enemies if they really wanted to with their spells, which is really cool. And then you have things like the super godly Stormcast Eternals themselves, who are huge, massive, hulking, eternal, immortal warriors that are reborn every single time they die, that come back to the battlefield in like surging storms of lightning and wreck everything in their path. And they look like angelic gods, as you can see here. So pretty impressive stuff, as you can imagine. The other thing that's really good about Age of Sigmar Soulbound is that it has these archetype systems built into it. So when you come to build a character, you can go from scratch effectively, or you can do what they do here, where you basically just choose one of these, do a little bit of spending of experience to buy the skills you particularly want, and then pretty much away you go. Like, there is very little stopping you diving into a game of Age of Sigmar Soulbound, and you have the added bonus of there being sort of like that low barrier to entry when it comes to the mechanics, to sort of help you get started into the game and the flow of it all as well. The other thing that's really nice about Soulbound that I really enjoy, well, there's two more things. So one of the really nice things is the idea of the Soulbound themselves. So in the game, there's a really big focus on you being these like chosen warriors who've been bound together by the gods. One of the hardest things for any GM is coming up with a reason, although why they'd need to do this, players should do this anyway. what a reason for your party to be together on the tabletop. Now I think Soulbound does a really good job of that because it kind of bakes it into the system. You are soulbound, you have been brought together by the gods in order to do mighty things. You know, it's within your interest to stay together, to serve your gods, to fight together against the darkness of chaos that exists out there in the world, which I think is really nice. The other good thing that I like is the way that combat works and all that kind of thing. So combat in Age of Sigmar Soulbound is done through, let's see if I can find a good example of this. So let's go to rules and let's go to combat. So combat in Age of Sigmar Soulbound is done like this, as you can see down here in the bottom right, where it's focused on the idea of zones rather than there being definitive distances for things. So the zones allow you to be very free and flowing with the way that you approach combat and that kind of thing, because you could be like, right, so I'm in zone 1, I know that I can move between the zones, but I can fly, so I'm literally just going to leap from one side to the other on my mighty angelic wings and smash down onto a bridge and, you know, butcher 3 enemies and all that kind of thing, which is really cool. That doesn't necessarily mean that the combat in the game is easy, by the way. Like, you might be, you know, the Marvel superheroes of, you know, the Warhammer world, but the enemies are just as deadly. And if you come up against some seriously nasty things, like even some of the craziest Skaven can be pretty awesome. You can get just as badly hurt, which is pretty cool. So you do need to plan and all that kind of stuff. But it's definitely like a power trip of a role-playing game that's very different from, I think, from what a lot of people have probably played before. That doesn't reinforce like a stereotypical power trip, if you know what I mean. It kind of flows away from what you'd think with D&D, and sort of embraces that slightly more holistic feel to it that you get with the Avengers, where you have lots of very different people from very different, you know, lineages and all that kind of thing coming together to fight for a common cause. So it's pretty awesome and very cool. And it's the reason I picked this over Warhammer Fantasy Battles is simply the ease of playing the system and how different it is. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay is great, but I think it's a little bit too granular for a lot of people. I would genuinely recommend it. I play the game fantastically. I play the game a lot. I play, you know, fantastic games with a lot of people. But I would highly recommend diving into Soulbound instead, because I think the The world is amazing. There's really good scope for GMs to come in and tell really fascinating stories and all that kind of thing as well. So the next game that we're going to be looking at is a very tiny, like, indie game. So we've gone away from like a big, massive franchise in Warhammer Age of Sigmar, but we're going back to sort of old school inspired dungeon delving with the Deep Dark. So the Deep Dark is a role-playing game that I backed on Kickstarter not too long ago. That comes from S. John Bateman. The cool thing about the Deep Dark is that it is a simple game in many respects, again, but it also sort of embraces, there you go, you can see my little tiny physical copy of it there, which is lovely, very nice. It's a simple game, but it embraces some very interesting ideas, which I really like. So the basics of the game are driven by the roll of a d6, basically. You're looking for a target number of 6. When you're doing any challenge, you roll a d6, and then you basically add your attribute and descriptors and tools and all that kind of thing into the mix in order to pass the test. Nice and easy, very simple to do. Classes and characters and lineages stuff are based on very classic fantasy adventuring fare. So you have your elves, your halflings, your humans, your dwarves, that kind of thing. They all have very basic, well, sort of very classic archetypal bonuses and minuses and that kind of thing. So +1 tough for dwarves, +1 death for elves. You know, it's the typical stuff that you've seen when you've been diving into play anything traditionally fantasy. What's really nice about the game, though, is that it sort of flows away from traditional classes. So you have things like the quartermaster, so someone who's really good at keeping everybody going on the road, the map maker and all that kind of thing. The skills are very nicely done to be slightly more descriptive, and they sort of add to you sort of explaining your actions as you go through them, which is really nice. Combat is very easy and quick to play as well. The book itself is not very big. You're not going to have I'm not going to have to spend a lot of time reading to really enjoy the game, which is really nice. Combat, again, very easy, you're sort of basically rolling quick and easy dice rolls. You do damage based on your weapons and that kind of thing. But the damage on the weapons that you do is a little bit different in many regards, because it doesn't go down the normal pathway almost, in that instead of there being like a number representing your health, you have a descriptor. So here you go. So you've got a dagger here that does d6 -1 damage. Okay, so say you did 3 damage. You'd go through the health descriptors. I'm pointing at the screen. You go through the health descriptors on the left there, you see, and you just mark off those 3 that got through to you. So you take off hale and hearty, merely winded, and showing my wounds, and you'd be down to that level basically. So you'd be like, I'm blooded but unbent, kind of thing. So again, it's kind of trying to ape the fact that health points in D&D, sort of hit points in D&D, are a very kind of like abstract thing, which I think is quite interesting. Whereas in this, it's putting together an interesting descriptor, an interesting thing for you to discuss as a player and a GM when you're in the midst of combat. So you're not just, I haven't just taken 5 hit points. You are showing your wounds. So you're encouraged to then roleplay that and dive into it and have fun with that, which I think is really nice. The other really cool thing about the Deep Dark is the idea of mapping and investigation. So I always view this game as a dungeon delving game where you're encouraged to draw the maps as you go as a player. So I'd like give my players, whoever's the mapper or whatever, I would give them maybe some math paper or just a plain piece of paper, and get them to either draw out the dungeons directly as they go, as if making their own little maps and delving into dungeons, or doing it as the flowchart as they suggest. So it's just sort of like arrows linking to different encounters and that kind of thing, which is how you should set things up as a dungeon master anyway. But I think that's really cool that they are sort of encouraged to be delving in it and finding out about the different things in the dungeon and mapping it out as they go, because they are wandering away from, the safe towns that they live in to sort of explore the deep darks of the wild and find all sorts of different things, which I think is really cool. There's a decent set of monsters and stuff in the game as well, which is really cool. So you've got some sort of basics in there, as you might have imagined, ghouls and goblins, but then you have weird things. So you have a Catablipas, whatever that is. It's just a thing that has a horrible stench. I'm sure people will know exactly what that is in the comments or something. But yeah, it's a really fun little one to dive into and have fun with, I think. Because of the simplicity of the system, I think it's one that would really encourage you to have fun with it and sort of bosh it and change things and stuff to sort of fit your group. You can work with traditional hit points if you really want to, but yeah, why would you do that when you've got descriptors, which I think is a much better way of playing. Yeah. There you go. So some really cool stuff there for you to dive into with the Deep Dark. Also, the other thing that's really nice about this is that I'll make everybody sit by scrolling through this. Is that the game is really cheap. Like, rather than you paying sort of £30-40 for a rulebook, you're paying maybe less than 20 quid for this to have fun with it and, you know, dive in and have fun. Let me see how much, if it has a price in this as I go through. It doesn't. But that's because it's probably, this was the Kickstarter edition, so I have no idea. Either way, this one is definitely worth going to check out, because I think the Deep Dark is a fun little role-playing game, very thin, easy to pick up and have fun. I'm going to bang the desk, I'm going to disappear off screen while I put that down. So, we're now moving away from playing with fantasy for a second to dive into those dark places. So here we go again. Pick this one up as well. Obviously, you can't have too many role-playing books in your collection. So those Dark Places is another sort of indie small production from Osprey Games. This is by Jonathan Hicks, who has done amazing work. So Hicks has put together a really interesting system here, where you're kind of playing. Okay, so do you like movies like Alien, Event Horizon, The Abyss, all those kind of games? Those kind of vibes, sort of hard sci-fi horror. This is this game, industrial science fiction role-playing games. The focus again with this game is on it being simple and easy to play. Now, one of the cool things about this game that I really like is that the rulebook is written as if it's a conversation with you, which isn't obviously the easiest thing to do because, you know, you've always got this idea of, like, I want to have everything blocked out so that I know exactly what everything means. Everything is there. You will find everything that you need to dive in and have fun with it, but it's written in such a way that it's kind of like a really fun sort of tongue-in-cheek corpo talking to you about what you should do on your missions and that kind of thing. The other thing that's really nice about this is that you're not expected to survive your trips, because again, this is built into sort of like an alien world. So when you dive in to play the game, there's a real, I think there's a really nice focus on the idea of playing one-shots with those dark places. You sit down, you play the game, you have fun with it, loads of people die, and then you're kind of done, sort of thing, which I think is really cool. You can carry on between games and play out campaigns and build your ship and all that kind of thing if you really want to, but I think one of the fun things about it is that you are kind of like on a knife's edge, and like things could go bad at any moment and you could die, and then you have players taking on the role of NPCs and all that kind of stuff as well. The game, again, very simple, uses a set of D6 for you to do everything you do. When you roll on the tables or anything like that, you're going to be rolling to basically hit a 7. If you hit the 7, then you've achieved your goal. If you exceed the 7, then you've done it with a little bit something extra. If you roll under a 7, you've done you've basically failed. But you failed in a way that like you did it, but something went wrong. Well, you almost did it, but something went wrong, and all that kind of thing and stuff. You can lower the difficulty and all that kind of thing if you want to, and you can level it, and you can raise it up, so you can go down to 6, or you can go up to 8. Because you've got that average roll of about 7, and you're rolling sort of like a maybe a +2 or a +3. Everything's quite hard to do unless you're very, very skilled in it, which I think is quite nice. But it kind of enforces that idea that like horror and terrible things are happening. You will also have roles on the ships and that kind of stuff as well. So you're going to have things like who's going to be the captain, who's going to be the liaison officer, and all that kind of stuff. Combat is very brutal in the game. Using a lot of firearms will basically kill you, which I think is really cool. You will just get blasted into pieces, which I think is really great. And it does mean that you will get absolutely schooled by a lot of enemies. What I really like in the game, though, is the pressure mechanics and sort of that and the way that works. So there's a really cool thing with the game where when terrifying things happen to you, you roll to see whether or not you suffer like episodes, as they're called. If you suffer episodes, you can lose stats, you can sort of turn into a gibbering mess, effectively, all that kind of thing. It's basically trying to like stand up to the terrors that are happening around you, which I think is really cool. And it's an interesting way to scare the players without hurting them. So you spook them with loads of interesting things to make them really nervous and het up, and then you hit them with the dark and nasty, horrible monster. Because one of the things that's always nice about these kind of horror movies and that kind of stuff is that the monster's not often seen until much further into the film, and then it reveals itself and all that kind of stuff. And the threat of something is often more scary than actually fighting the threat in combat and stuff. So yeah. So there's a bunch of stuff in here for you to dive into and have fun with and play around with. Again, it's very much a system where you can sort of tinker with things and tweak things to work for you and all that kind of stuff. It's one of those really nice games where they've done a really good job of getting the theme right for it. Very simple and easy to dive into. Really cool idea for playing one shot style sessions. Heavily moves with that kind of industrial sci-fi vibe of Alien and Dead Space and that kind of stuff, but does it in such a way that it allows the storyteller to be inventive and have fun with it. So you're diving into a game and not feeling like you're hampered by by a lot of mechanics sort of weighing you down, which I think is really nice. But yeah, it's definitely worth diving into and having fun with, and I would heartily recommend it as well. Again, you're not going to be paying much for this. Like the book that I got here, 15 quid. It says on the back of this one, 15 quid for those Dark Places from Osprey Games. So if you're interested in picking up a new role-playing game for industrial sci-fi industrial sci-fi role-playing, then you can definitely do that. Just an example, like, I'm just going to show you these things because, it's a little bit of extra time, but who cares? So that's the planning I did for a session. So I just literally wrote down a bunch of stuff on a piece of paper, and I just used those as cues in order to play the game, which was really nice and easy. Simple. And that's the cool little character sheet that you have. This is one I used for one of our Let's Plays. So yeah, there's your stats, and I just sort of simple, easy, fun to dive into, and with a lot of scope for it to go into different places, which I think is really cool. So yeah, that is those Dark Places. Dot screen. There we go. Now we get back to big boys. So I've taken you to the worlds of Warhammer. What's the other big role-playing world that you can dive into and have fun with? Well, of course, it is the One Ring. So the One Ring has recently had a resurgence with its second edition of the game. As you can see here, oh my god, this book is beautiful. I have to say, I have done a sort of like unbooking of this where I talked about the book in a little bit more detail. You can go and check that out. I'll have the link in the video. But the thing that I really like about the One Ring is that they've managed to... There's something about the mechanics and the way that it works that feels like it nails Middle-earth. So what's fun about the One Ring is that mechanically it's very much a game where you roll against yourself. So the difficulty of your tests is based on a TN that you have on the character sheet. So say your strength is 16 or something, for want of a better word. 6 or something. You minus that from the score of 20, and then you're rolling against 14 effectively to play to do your tests using a dice ball system, using d6s. But the other thing that's really cool about the game is that it uses these fun dice. So you use this thing called the feat dice. So the feat dice have a Gandalf symbol on one number, on one face, and a Sauron eye on the other. And if you roll those, you get like an impressive success. If you roll the Sauron eye, then it's a terrible failure and all that kind of thing. Then you tie in sort of, if you roll sixes, you get little success items as well, icons as well, to give you extra degrees of success, which I think is really nice. And you can tweak this by adding dice into the pool, you can take them away, and all that kind of stuff. So it's a game where you don't have the binary pass or fail that you get in D&D. It's one of the things that I've always been sort of like, ugh, I don't really like that about D&D, is the idea when you roll a d20, you could roll and it could just go, you could just fail. Like, regardless of how mighty a wizard you are, you could just fail, right? Sometimes you have advantage and disadvantage in the game to kind of like balance and mitigate things, and obviously your skill is there to try and like, you know, help in that regard, but you can still just fail, and then that's the end of your turn, you did nothing. Because of degrees of success and degrees of failure, you have the ability to keep things moving in a game, and a player will never feel like they've missed out on something when they're playing. And that's what I really like about the One Ring, is that it encourages that kind of like fail forward feel to the game, which I think is good. Again, like, one of the fun things about this is that the game is really simple to understand and play. The rulebook's not the best laid out, I will say, but I managed to dive in and sort of get it after maybe, you know, a read or two, I should say, as a GM. But the system's very simple and easy to play. It's very quick to make characters too. I made a character when I was playing in about 20 minutes, where you basically choose one of the lineages that you can play as. So you've got the Bardings, the Dwarves, the Elves of Lindon, the Hobbits of the Shire, and the Men of Bree, and the Rangers of the North. You basically choose an array based on what you see there. This is a little bit like a Sigmar Soulbound in many regards, where they're trying to make it very easy for you to just literally make a character and just get started and have fun. There's your derived stats, so that's, you can see the things you're going to be rolling against, your TNs and stuff. Then you choose some skills, you mark which ones are favoured, which is cool. And then you choose a calling, so you've got your captains, your champions, your scholars, your treasure hunters, all the standard fare that you would imagine from a Tolkien world. You choose your gear, and then literally you are out the door once you've done some sort of tweaking here and there with XP and the rewards and virtues and stuff as well. The other thing that's really nice about the game is that I think it focuses on moving away from well, what separates it from D&D, in my opinion, is that degree of success and failure, and that kind of thing, and the way that it kind of enhances the world of Middle-earth on the tabletop. So one of the cool things about it is this, as you can see here, weirdly enough, I've switched it, this idea of the fellowship. So when you put together your group, you're not just a bunch of adventurers that have come together and they just, you know, start working together. You have a patron, for example. So maybe you do all the things you do for Bard, or for Gandalf, or for Balin, or Bilbo. And you work for them, and you do lots of interesting, fun things for them, and sort of wander around the world, solving mysteries and fighting monsters and all that kind of thing as well. The other thing that's really nice about the game is that I think they've made it so that combat feels very dynamic and Lord of the Ringsy. You have what's called like stances, so effectively you dive into the game and you have like a ranged moment to begin with, where everybody fires arrows at each other, and then you charge into the action and you decide what stance you're going to be in. So you're like, okay, so I'm going to be forward, I'm going to be open, I'm going to be defensive, I'm going to be ranged, and then enemies are paired up against heroes and they fight each other, and then you sort of, and then the fight flows into the next stage, and there's a really nice way that the combat moves and feels, and actions in the game are really cool because you're sort of like you're fighting against sort of like you're swinging to sort of like hit and damage opponents, but then when you do hit them, you have like a wound rating effectively on the characters, where if you hit them and then you roll a certain number of successes and that kind of thing, you'll do sort of like extra damage that can basically just take out an enemy immediately if you're very good at fighting. So it has that feel of like Aragorn rushing in and like taking out 6 or 7 orcs or something as he fights, and then sort of Legolas firing his bow over the top and taking out things and that kind of stuff. But then equally you have these the enemies are just as tough and they can do just as much damage to you and all that kind of stuff as well. So they've done a really nice job of sort of like playing with the flow of the game. The other thing that's really nice about the game is that it doesn't just, it has sort of health points in a way where you've got endurance, but it does this really nice thing where it kind of plays with that, and once your endurance gets to the level of your load or your fatigue effectively, you become weary, so suddenly all of your attacks, only half of the symbols on the dice are going to be even going to be able to help you in your fighting. So you're not encouraged to just keep fighting constantly until you run out of hit points. Sometimes discretion is the better part of valor, and you run away and sort of like leave it for another day and all that kind of stuff, which I think is really nice. So yeah, they've played a really fun card, I'd say, when it comes to getting across the feel of Lord of the Rings. The thing that's really nice about it is this idea of the journey map and that kind of stuff as well. So you actually plan journeys, and you have like a little cool sort of journey log where you write down where you're going to go and what you're going to do. You then decide who's going to be the scout and the hunter and all that kind of thing, and then you make tests based on your journey, and you roll dice depending on when you're going to see what you find as you go, which I think is really cool. So it's got that feel of the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit, where it's not just about the fighting, it's more about the talking and the interacting with people in the world, and also discovering things as you go, because that's one of the things about Middle Earth. It's full of wonders and joy. It also helps that the book is amazing and has a brilliant artwork and all that kind of thing in it, which is always good. But yeah, it's a really fun game. I don't want to go too much into it because I'm very hesitant that I've already been talking for half an hour, which is crazy. But yeah, it's definitely one to go and dive into if you want to have a little bit of fun with a Tolkien edge. Really good mechanics, really nice and believable within Tolkien's world. I think is really fun with it. So yeah. So the last book that we're going to be looking at is also from the folks at Free League. And we're going to be looking at Vaesen. So Vaesen is something a little bit different as well. As you could imagine by the title there, it's a horror role-playing experience, but it's set with like a Nordic twist. So Vaesen uses the system from the Tales from the Loop games. So if you're interested in those mechanics, then you will not be far off when it comes to having fun with this. The Tales from the Loop mechanics are ones that a lot of people are very familiar with, so I'm not going to go too much into that when it comes to playing the game. It's pretty simple and easy to get your head around. The thing that I really like about the game, though, again, is that their mechanics push you to do this kind of like fail forward style thing when you're doing anything, which I think is really nice. So it's one of those games where you are encouraged to do things because there's always a chance that you'll succeed, but even within failure you might do something that's helpful, which I think is quite nice. So here you go. You can learn about the skill test here and all that kind of stuff, which is cool. So you have that pool of dice that you roll. You're looking for sixes when you're rolling, which is always neat. But then you can do things like you can push the roll, so you can take conditions in order to re-roll dice and all that kind of stuff, which is always fun. So yeah, you can see. So it's one of those games where you have that little pool of dice. It has those sixes, which are hard to hit, which is always interesting. But then you sort of like your the fail forward is there. As you can see, the story must go on, which kind of allows you to dive in and have fun with it and play around with the idea according to your GM's storytelling ability and all that kind of stuff as well. What is really nice about Vaesen, though, is that it's very different from other role-playing games out there. Pretty much all of the games that I've talked about today have, adventure and exploration and fighting. What's nice about Vaesen is that it doesn't necessarily have that in it. Vaesen, the idea of Vaesen is that you are one of these folk who have effectively been sort of touched with the sight, kind of thing, for want of a word, where you can see the spooky, weird things in the world, the trolls, the fairies, the pixies, the undead, the vampires, and you have been charged alongside your friends to basically hold back the Vaesen from, encroaching on society, but also working out why the Vaesen are doing that, and sort of what the reasoning behind it at the same time. So the example that I've always used with this is that, say you're playing the game and you are called to go and investigate a lumber mill that has been absolutely destroyed by something, right? It's torn in and smashed the place to pieces and all that kind of thing. You go there to investigate. Everyone else believes it was just an explosion or something like that. Maybe like a pressure valve blew and everything blew up and there was all that kind of thing. But you work out that it was a troll that had done this. So you then track the troll and you delve into the forest and you work out where it is. And then when you find the troll, you work out that it has done this because maybe the mill that had been set up was placed within its territory, and the work that they were doing had actually poisoned the river, and maybe one of their younglings has become sick because of that. And so you, as the explorers, the investigators, have to work out how you approach that. Do you just get rid of the troll? Do you work out a way to heal the youngling? Do you admonish the humans and do something to make sure that the factory is moved on? It's a really nice balancing act behind sort of like monsters are there and they're nasty and horrible, but not all of them are doing it for nasty, horrible reasons. A troll, an animal is an animal and it doesn't know any better. A fox will steal things and all that kind of thing. A wolf will attack you because, that's what it does. You're in its territory. So it's a really nice sort of play on the idea of hunting and dealing with the dark things out there in the world without being so just sort of like, I'm a hunter, I go out and kill things, and then that's the end of the issue, which I think is really cool. So yeah, it's a really fun game that sort of like encourages you to have fun with the idea of storytelling, and you start off with a mystery that unfolds into an investigation, that unfolds into a hunt, that evolves into a discussion and a role. There's a real sense of pushing the role play in a game of Vaesen, which I think is really fun. Again, it helps that the game looks amazing. The other thing that's cool about the game is that it kind of like has this reason to pull you all together. So you're all pulled together because you're these people that have the sight. There's sort of the ability to see the strange things within the world, and you actually have your own headquarters that you build, and it has been dilapidated and left it to ruin. So you then spend money and use your upgrades to build up your facility, and you build libraries, and you build cellars, and you build corridors full of weapons and pigeon lofts and all that kind of thing. So it's a really fun game which encourages you to have a lot of fun with the idea of like, we are the people in the background, sort of keeping the monsters at bay. It's got a kind of like really fun sort of almost Hellboy feel to it, where you're like, with the BPRD, they can sort of see all the strange things going on in the world, and they kind of work to help the creatures, but they don't just get rid of them. A little bit like Men in Black and that kind of stuff as well, which I think is quite nice. Some very interesting comparisons there to different different things. But yeah, the other thing that's really fun about it is it's set in Sweden, which is really cool. Well, Sweden, Norway, Finland, and Denmark. So you're playing around with this kind of like Nordic mythology. They have also brought out a book which deals with Britain and Britain and Ireland as well, if you prefer to play your games set there rather than in Scandinavia. So yeah, it's a really fun one to dive into. The thing that I really like about the game is that effectively you come in here as the GM, as the storyteller, and you just pick a Vaesen. So you'd be like, okay, so I want to do a story about a mare, right? So you pick the mare, and it doesn't matter that the monster could be nasty and horrible and terrifying. That's the whole point. You take the mare, and then you just set up an interesting story about the mare. You don't tell the characters what it is. They have to work it out, so they have to go and do the research and find out all about it and that kind of thing, which I think is really nice. So yeah, it's a really fun system that I would love to play more of and have fun with. Again, it helps that the book is amazingly well designed and all that kind of stuff. It's a really good use of the sort of Tales from the Loop system, that that sort of like pool of dice with the sixes, and you can push it to try again and all that kind of thing. But done in a different way, especially when it comes to combat and that kind of stuff as well. They've done a really good job with it. But yeah, while we've seen some games out there that are very sort of focused on the idea of combat and adventuring, I think this one sort of takes things in a little bit of a different direction, which is cool. So maybe don't read this bit, or don't look too hard at what I'm showing you here if you're a player that's diving into Vaesen. So there we go. We've had a look at 5 role-playing games there. I have taught for a really long time. We have Age of Sigmar Soulbound, which was the world of the Mortal Realms from the folks at Cubicle 7. I'll put all the links down to these below. We have The Deep Dark, which is from S. John Bateman, which is a small indie production, which I think is amazing for those who want to dive in and have fun with a little bit of classic dungeon delving with an old school twist. We have Those Dark Places, which is the sort of industrial sci-fi role-playing game from Jonathan Hicks by Osprey Games, which is again really fun, quick and easy to dive into and have fun with. We have The One Ring, which comes from the folks at Free League, which is the second edition of the game and just embraces the idea of Tolkien's world and Middle-earth and really puts that at the fore with what you're doing and how you would play the game. Again, really fun mechanics. They're a little bit different from D&D, but not so different that you'll be like, what the hell's going on? And then last but not least, we have Vaesen, which we just talked about there, which uses that sort of system that a lot of people will be familiar with from Tales from the Loop, with a pool of dice with those d6s. You're looking for 6s to hit and to succeed in your actions, that kind of thing. But then you've got that fail-forward mechanic in there as well. But the big thing about Vaesen is that sort of exploration and investigation and mystery and stuff, which I think is really fun. So yeah, if you've enjoyed looking at those games and you are really interested in them, let me know which one of these 5 is the one that you're going to pick. I will have made sure that there are timestamps and stuff in the bottom of the video so that you'll be able to go and look at the role-playing game of your choice and have a little bit more of a look back at what I've been talking about if you've got this far through the video. If you have got this far through the video, thank you very much. That's really nice of you. Also, tell me what you think of the new setup. Do you like this? Did you prefer it if I was a little tiny box in the corner? Do you like seeing more of my big old face? But yeah, 5 role-playing games that I think are well worth going to check out beyond looking at D&D. If you have other suggestions, make sure to put them down below. It's always nice to hear what people say in the comments. And I'll be back with another video very, very soon. I'm going to look off to the side to make sure I get ready to stop the recording. So yes, thank you very much, everybody. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And I will be back in the near future with another video. Bye for now.